Hello, this is Signals from the Hill, a podcast about comics from Avery Hill Publishing. I'm Kat Chapman, Head of Marketing and Production for Avery Hill. In this episode, I'll be talking to Webster Sharp, creator of our newest book, The Scrapbook of Life and Death, which came out on the 3rd of September. Webster Sharp is an artist based in the north of England. She began her professional art career as a portrait painter and has also worked in textile, sculpture, collage, and drawing. Having always been a lover of comics, she committed herself to a career in sequential art in 2021. In this conversation, we delve into the strange, the eccentric, and the macabre, as well as talking about how she makes her comics and the inspirations behind this particular book. I'm here talking to Webster Sharp. Hi, Gemma.
Hello.
Thank you for talking to me. Got a copy of your book here, which is looking absolutely brilliant. I love the size of it. It's just...
Yeah, it's kind of pointless me doing anything that's going to be printed smaller than A4, because you just won't be able to see it. You won't be able to see the dots or the detail or anything. But yes, thank you for printing it so big.
Your original art is kind of is it A3 size? It's quite
yes.
large, isn't it? Yeah, so it's worth printing it large, definitely. Yeah, it's such a cool book. I've got so many questions for you. So it's kind of based on the archives of this guy called George Ives. How did you find out about him, and could you tell us a little bit about him?
Well, I was at this pub in 2008 and it had a bookshelf, and because I used to sit there and not talk to people, I would investigate the bookshelf, and on the bookshelf was this book about him, and it was called Man Bites Man, and it was it is a big book, A4 size, and in it are some of the most interesting newspaper clippings he collected. He collected newspaper clippings from like something stupid like 1912, like right up until right before he died in the 50s, and he had all these volumes of scrapbooks full of all these newspaper clippings, and this book was just a small amount of them, separated into chapters like nature and strange people and things. And it was amazing. It was like when you happen across something that's exactly your taste and wouldn't appeal to anyone else, and that I don't think that's happened since. And because I found this earlier. I didn't think that I would, because at the time I was collecting my own strange newspaper clippings.
Oh, wow.
Of the newspaper. And it was just 2008, there was the internet, but when you do something and you think you're the only person in the whole world that does it.
Yeah.
And I've always found these a great source of inspiration for things that I've painted and drawn over the years. I don't think it exists, but what was it? The Weekly World News. That was great. Yeah. And I've only got one in here from the Weekly World News. It's titled "Idiot Prince Calls Poor Boy a Fatty," with it would have been Prince Philip kind of saying something he shouldn't have said. And there's lots of grotty, horrible stuff in here as well. Brilliant. But I've always found it, the secret lives of humans have always interested me.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. That's really interesting, because my question had been whether the newspaper clippings book was something that you'd actually found as a book, because I don't know whether it would be something that's still in print or whatever.
I don't know if it's still in print, but this is the book that I borrowed from the pub.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating that you were collecting clippings as well.
Yeah, how often does that happen?
Yeah, it's rare.
I'm doing something and then you find someone else that does it as well.
And I listened to the guys on Awesome Comics podcast talking about your book, and they were saying some things about some George Ives that I didn't know, like he was a gay rights campaigner and stuff as well. So it just sounded like a really interesting person, and I had never heard of him. So
yeah, I'm surprised that there's like nothing else really being. I know that the book I've done isn't about him, but I'm very surprised that there's nothing out there about his life, because massively interesting guy.
Yeah.
And I liked the sort of, there's a historical feel to the book because it's sort of Edwardian times, and that comes across. But I wrote in my notes that it feels oddly timeless as well. And that's what I find interesting about history, is that human beings have been doing the same things like forever. And it's always really interesting when something like that happens and you think, oh, this guy was doing exactly what I'm doing, but in the Edwardian period. Are you interested in history at all?
Yeah, I'm interested in history. If I find out something from the past, it's not that I've hunted out the obscure and strange things, but they've always just seemed to kind of fall into my lap. And it's I don't know, like growing up working class, it's all instilled in you, that kind of very, I don't know, it's hard to explain. I do have an interest in history. I was talking to someone about this the other day, about how the history lessons at my school were incredibly, we learned just the most random things in secondary school. We did Greek medicine, we did the German Autobahn. We didn't even learn about like the Second World War or anything. We didn't really, or the Cold War. We didn't, in my brain, didn't learn about anything like relevant or substantial in any way. And I think for a lot of people who, education kind of misses the mark a bit, they have to do their own investigations into things.
Yeah, I feel the same because I didn't like history when I was at school, and I dropped it at one point because I was allowed to take sociology instead of history. So I dropped it really early, and then it left me feeling like I know no history at all. So now I'm in my 40s. I've started trying to get into it because it's actually more interesting than I was led to believe by my school teachers. But I do, it's that thing of like, because I studied a lot of Shakespeare as well. I was a literature student, and then
Yeah.
you would read a phrase that someone had written back then that is so beautifully written and beautifully expressed, and you would think, this just, if someone said that to me right now, I'd be completely amazed. So it's just really interesting, that through line with human experience.
Yeah. I also like kind of the history of objects as well. There's a great documentary on YouTube about the Donner Party. It's an old PBS documentary. PBS, I think, did the best documentaries, and it opens up with this little, well, using the words from this woman. It's been narrated, and I don't know if you know the story about that.
I
The
do. It's
people
fascinating.
going west to California and they get stuck.
Yeah.
Or they get over the mountains and the snow, and they
Yeah.
can camping at the lake, and there's cannibalism and stuff. And this little girl survived it, and she had with her all through that terrible time this kind of like little like peg doll thing, this little doll, and she had it with her like all her life. And you can go and see that in this kind of little museum that they've got at the site of where all this awfulness happened. And I'd love to go and see that.
Yeah, I listened to a podcast about that story not too long ago. And yeah, I've always found museums of artifacts more exciting than sort of art galleries as something to go and look at personally. I love looking at old objects and things. Are there any other eccentric figures that you're interested in? Because Ives was quite an eccentric.
I mean, I think all the artists and all the writers that I like have little things about them which could be described as eccentric, or, or more likely that, they had some kind of neurodivergence, but that wasn't a thing back then. There's a great, well, it's not great. I like Diane Arbus a lot, the photographer, New York photographer. She started out fashion photographer with her husband. And in the late 50s, she started doing her own kind of street photography. And she would take photographs of, other people before her had like taken photographs of sex workers and carnival workers and things like that. But she had a very specific way of taking photographs, in that she would develop relationships with these people that lasted, but sometimes like 10 years, in order to get kind of the one photograph. She took a famous photograph of is called Eddie Carmel, and the photograph was Eddie Carmel, the Jewish giant at home in the Bronx. And it's a photograph of him in his regular sized living room, but he was like, I don't know how tall he was. He was like, what, like 8 feet or something. And he's all hunched over, and he's got his 2 little elderly parents kind of looking up at him.
Wow.
And took her, like, she knew her for 10 years. It took 10 years for her to get that photograph. And she took the photograph of 2 twins at some kind of like twin pageant in New Jersey that inspired Stanley Kubrick's use of the twins in his film The Shining. I have read The Shining, the book. I can't remember if the twins are actually in the book like that, but I don't think they are. But the visual, how it looks in the film with the girls in the matching dresses and the matching hair, is meant to have come from her photograph, because they did know each other, because he did, when he was kind of like a kid prodigy chess player, and he just had it with school, and when he was 16 he was like a photographer for Life magazine. So I do think that they did slightly know each other before he entered filmmaking properly, when he was a photographer. There's a story of June and Jennifer Gibbons. I'm pretty sure that's the name. And they were some twins that lived in South Wales. I think they were born in the 60s. And they developed their own language, and they didn't interact with people. And they wrote very strange stories. And I think they kind of engaged in kind of light criminal activity, shoplifting and things, I think.
Right.
But whatever they did, it was enough to get them put into Broadmoor at quite a young age.
Wow.
Where they kind of lived for a while. And then they had made some kind of pact, like one of us has to die in order for the other one to have like a kind of regular life.
Okay.
And very shortly after making this pact, one of them did die.
Oh, wow.
And then the other twin, who I think is still alive, started to communicate and kind of live a regular existence.
Oh my goodness.
So
that is fascinating.
Yeah, I'm interested in people like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, like you were saying, I think it's the neurodivergence thing has become much more of a hot topic in the last few years, and people have been talking about, that and mental health and things much more openly over the last couple of decades, I guess. But it's just fascinating the way that human brain works, and what kind of behaviors that leads to, and what kind of relationships between people that leads to, and things. It's fascinating. One thing I watched recently was about have you ever heard of the Mole Man of Hackney? He was a guy that lived in Hackney and was obsessed with tunneling under his house. He had this ramshackle big house that was just falling apart, and he would let it out to students really, really cheap. But then he was also like secretly burrowing onto the street, causing a few bits of pavement to collapse and things, until they eventually evicted him because it was really unsafe. But things like that are just really, really interesting. Kind of understand why he was doing that, what it gave him to do.
I'm sure there's I'm sure there's a lot of student housing that's like that now.
Exactly. Yeah, it probably was unusual. But as you were saying about the Donner Party as well, that I'm really interested in those sort of extremes of human experience. I'm like a big true crime fan. I think I mentioned to you before. And to me, it's all about that. It's about an interest in sort of like the extremes of human experience and what goes on in people's heads, from the most depraved, awful stuff to also, I listen to a podcast that's about survival stories. So that's what it made me think of with the Donner Party, that you've got these extremes of, humans are capable of terrible things, but they're also capable of amazing strength and sort of will to survive, and heroism in helping other people survive and things. So is true crime something you're interested in as well?
Yeah, I remember like kind of coming across my mum's like true crime books growing up, and the covers were terrifying, and then you look in and there's like crime scenes and you're a little kid and you're like, what is this? This looks strange and stuff. If you ask me, the scariest things that you can watch on YouTube to do with true crime are the Crime Watch reenactments from the 80s and 90s, because they're terrifying. And I guess that they were made at a point in time where the culture wasn't saturated in true crime. There was no makeup tutorials while talking about murder and stuff. And people were more, I'm not saying that now we're more desensitized to it, but we might possibly be a little bit because it's just everywhere. But these things were made at a time when it wasn't. And it was basically, I don't know what there was in the way of true crime dramas, really. I can't remember. There wouldn't have been much, but Crime Watch once a month, if you want to scare yourself, you'd watch that. Always terrifying.
Yeah.
It's always the most harrowing cases. In fact, there's some that I don't even think, if there was that program on TV now, I don't even think some of these cases would be used, because they're just startling.
Yeah, probably that's true. I didn't really watch it at the time, but I got into a lot of the American shows, like just FBI Files and Unsolved Mysteries and all those shows.
Yeah.
That's almost easier to watch because it feels like it's over there and it's not quite so terrifying. And then if you watch a UK thing, suddenly you're like, oh no, this is way more scary because it literally happened up the road.
I mean, I've listened to like, scariest 911 call compilations and stuff. And yeah, they are scary, but you listen to like the British ones, like calling to report a crime, and it just sounds like they're ordering chips or something.
Yeah, they tend
It's definitely
tend to be a little unemotive. English.
Yeah.
There's one case in your book, Albert Fish, who was an American murderer. Had you come across that story before you read it in the George Ives clippings?
Yeah, I think he's like kind of one of the people in true crime that kind of floats around out there, and there might be a really naff documentary about it. But I don't recall ever seeing like a book about him. I've seen a couple of like YouTube videos possibly, but yeah, terrible.
Yeah.
I read that, like, his look, because he like confessed to all these crimes right before he was put in the electric chair, and right before his execution he wrote these letters to his lawyer detailing like even more awful things, and they were just so horrible that the lawyer kind of he put them away, didn't show them to anyone or anything.
Yeah.
This isn't really Albert Fish, but I mean, I remember myself at secondary school, I was the weird kid, and I remember it probably would have been in sixth form. I would have been like 18. I was about to leave school. I remember walking through the school, and I remember seeing what I'm assuming was like a first year girl. And she was walking and reading at the same time, which you don't get a lot of these days. But the book, I mean, she wouldn't have been more than like 12, but the book was the Fred and Rose West book. The main book about them, with the white cover with their pictures on the front. And I just thought to myself, oh my God, you're gonna have such trouble just having friends and stuff. I remember I feel really bad for her. I thought, oh God, it's me.
Yeah.
It's me years ago.
That's really funny. Oh God. I just found that the page, this is one of the pages relates to that story. I just think that the visuals are amazing. I love how you've incorporated the fish from his name.
Yeah, that seemed to make sense for me.
Yeah, because that was another thing I wanted to ask you about, was visual imagination. I'm always amazed by artists that have this ability to create this really kind of surreal visual imagery, because I'm not very good at it. Sometimes I've sat down to try and make artwork that's like really imaginative or surreal and I just can't do it. I'm just stuck with this realistic mode of storytelling. And I think I discovered that I've got aphantasia, which means a lack of mental visual imagery. I kind of think
Right.
in concepts, and I kind of have an idea of how I want something to look, but I can't make it like weird and crazy. So I'm always amazed
Yeah.
that people can do that. Do you have a really rich visual imagination?
Yeah, yeah, it's too much sometimes. It feels like, I don't know, like I see, like, I know it used to be paint, but I almost see a page in nearly everything. Or if I hear something, like even what were we watching the other day? Chris Packham, the nature wildlife guy,
Yeah.
and he was talking about how he went in this pond to track down these raft spiders, that there's meant to be a massive kind of influx of those in the UK again, because they've been pretty like rare or dormant or something for a while. And he was talking about being like up to his shoulders in this pond, and that he could feel all the kind of the dragonfly larvae kind of like nibbling at his thigh stuff.
Right.
Like, how can that not be a page? I mean, how can I not use it?
Yeah.
Horrifying,
Yeah.
and it's like, Spring Watch or something.
I have heard people
Always,
say that to me, that if they're, sorry for interrupting, if they have that very vivid mental imagery, that it can almost be too much. That's
yeah,
quite,
because you're always thinking that what you've done could have been better, because surely you've had another good idea along the way. Or worse still, you do a page that you think's brilliant. Oh my God, this is really good. And then like the next day you think of something or see something, and you can think about the page you've just done and be like, oh God, that's not anything, that's rubbish. Oh my God, I can't believe I drew that. It's never, there's always, and it makes you scared to work on something sometimes, because it's like, well, there's always, meant to be a better idea right around the corner, or I'll think of it like tonight or something, so I can't start yet. And it does stop you working sometimes.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think it is something that all artists struggle with, though, that there's sometimes you have to just go like, no, it's done. It is what it is, and it's fine. And you have to let go sometimes of this idea that you should have done it differently, or it should be better somehow. I don't know. It's really hard, though.
Totally.
There's that test for aphantasia thing where you're supposed to, they tell you, imagine a ball on a table and someone pushes it and it rolls off the table. And then the way people describe how they imagined it tells you how much visual imagination they have. For me, it's like really dull. It's like a scientific diagram of a ball on a table and like it rolls, and I don't even see the person pushing it. And then I talk to friends who have this amazingly vivid mental imagery, and they're like, oh no, I saw what the person was wearing, I saw the light in the room, I saw all these details. And I was like, oh my God. I think it must almost make it does. I feel like it does make it slightly easier for me to make artwork, because I'm always just grateful I managed to make anything. like
That's great.
But then but like I say, there are times where I want to create something that's a bit more kind of weird and crazy, and I just can't do it somehow. So I guess it's just different. Everyone has different ways of working and thinking. So
I always get scared that my explanations of how and why I make work just aren't enough, and that I'll just tell them like, I don't know, it just comes to me, and it's like the crappiest explanation in the world. But it's really hard to explain if you're talking to someone who isn't an artist, and they want to know where things come from. It's like, I don't know if you'll understand. Or you try your real best to explain, and you can just see on the person's face that like either wasn't what they were wanting to hear, or they don't get it.
well, yeah, it is really tricky. I think, yeah, people don't quite understand if they're not someone that does creative work. They don't really understand it. I've always had people, because I'm a little bit of a reluctant drawer. I don't love it for its own sake. and people are always like, I can't understand that. I would imagine that you would want to draw all the time. And it's like, no, I really don't. I have to force myself. So I guess, yeah, people don't really, there's a lot of variation in how people work and approach things. And but having to explain your work is really, I think everyone hates doing that. We're working on a new edition of Tilly Walden's spinning book at the moment. And I actually read some stuff that she wrote as a sort of foreword in the book, where she said, yeah, when we would analyze texts at school, they would always say, what do you think the author intended? And she was like, I was always really suspicious of that, because I don't think people really intend a huge amount. I think they just do it, and what comes out comes out. And sometimes it's kind of like magic. You just don't really know. And then it's there, and you're like, that's great, but I can't explain it to you. So going back to your book, it's so rich. It's got all sorts of elements. It's got sort of the true crime. It's got horror, body horror, eroticism. I was curious about what sort of things, what sort of cultural things have influenced your work. Like, are there particular films and things? And
well, I'm going to just say what so many people will just assume anyway is, David Lynch is up there. Something about his work, and I think I owe a lot to how I draw and what I draw to being kind of working class, where you kind of, it's kind of, your upbringing is kind of, it's a bit bleak, it's a bit bland, it's a bit, you live in a community that's kind of brought up with kind of a kind of what will the neighbors think mentality. That kind of paranoia about other people and what they think of you. And I always thought with David Lynch's work that there is that he kind of uses a more American way of explaining that, but kind of exploring what's under the surface and what's behind curtains, and the private lives of people, what people do when no one's watching. That's the best I can explain it right now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love Lynch, and I did sort of think of him with when I was looking through your work. His work is really kind of erotic and dark, and it's just got its own feeling. It's really hard to explain what it is, but it's like he creates this world that is kind of entirely his own, which I think is just really brilliant.
Like Blue Velvet, with Jeffrey's living in he's back from college, he's living with his parents for the summer, I guess, and he gets involved with the just shadiest people that you'd never expect to be in like a sleepy town like that. And
yeah, definitely. In the book, you've got a line where you describe the act of making comics as an exorcism. Can you say anything more about that?
Well, I guess everyone that writes or makes any kind of art, has something in them that they need to get out or work through, or kind of channel into something so that they can see it in a different way, to make them understand themselves more. Writing and drawing, it's a search for something, even though it might not be planned that way. Everyone has things that they need to work through and get out, and I guess I know, like, all the work I do is about me, even when it's about things that if I were to do something about someone else, there would be me in it. Yeah, everyone's work is in some way about themselves, and I guess that's kind of, I know, like, I've always had a problem with my identity and sense of self, and searching for the authentic self and stuff. And I guess that's kind of what I meant when I put that.
Yeah.
Also, because when I was doing this book, I was having such a bad time of it that I was kind of having to use it to kind of get stuff out as well. which also as well kind of wasn't even the plan for that. In a funny way, this book didn't turn out the way that I planned it to.
Yeah, because I think you sort of touch on that in the book itself. Like you say that halfway through it sort of changed a bit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So that just came about out of you having a tough time, and you sort of just found yourself doing a sort of more personal element to the book than you'd intended. Is that what happened?
Well, I wasn't having a very good time of it, and I thought it'd be a very good idea to unalive myself. And I'm going to use that word because I don't know, I don't want to affect, you guys' YouTube stuff or whatever.
Yeah.
And it seemed a really good idea at the time, just because I didn't feel like I'd achieved anything and my life hadn't worked out and stuff.
Oh, I'm sorry you were going through that. But
Yeah, so that happened. So I sent you guys an email. In fact, when that happened, I was working on the last page of that Albert Fish story. I hadn't finished it yet. And I sent Ricky an email asking if I could change the direction of the book, which was great because he said yes. If he'd said no, I'm not too sure what I would have done. And so I had all this work that I'd done that I hadn't used for anything, and it was like weirdly like prophetic. If I could look at it and I could kind of, even though I'd done it like about 8 months ago, I could look at it and see myself in it now and how I felt and stuff. So I took this work and I cut it up. I made new pages out of some of it. I put it in an order that I felt. Well, I added new work to it as well, but I put it in an order that I felt kind of, to me, in my brain, made sense. I could see the progression of things through it. And so that's kind of why it's in 2 halves. But I remember the week after I did it, I tried to do that, unalive myself, on the Friday, and the next Thursday I was back working on the book, and I had to draw the rest of that last Albert Fish page, and it was just horrible. It made me feel sick. I didn't want to draw it. It was just, it was so hard to finish that page. It was terrible, but I did.
You didn't consider just abandoning that story? Or
Oh no, I'd never do that. I'd never abandon any kind of work. I'd never, and also I hate to say no. I hate to say no. If someone asks me to do something, I will always, really try to say yes and stuff. I have a good work ethic like that, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, I've spoken to some creative people who've said that they can't relate to the idea of creative work as sort of cathartic in any way, that it doesn't really work that way for them. But I think it does for me personally. Like, if I find it really useful to have somewhere to just put feelings. Otherwise, what else am I going to do with them? I don't know. It's just, really interesting the way different people work. And also I think that's really great about the way Ricky works as an editor. He's always said that he just wants to work with artists that he admires, and he doesn't really care what they do as long as they do something that's meaningful.
That's great. Yeah.
Nice. I mean, a lot of editors would probably try and steer the project in certain ways, but he's always said, no, the point is for you to make what you want to make. How did he end up taking this book on in the first place?
I think I approach you guys. I'm very good at, even though I'm not confident about people in the real world, excuse me, I'll always ask. I'll always approach someone and ask something, because if you don't, then you'll never know. And I think it was just me sending you guys an email saying, I have this idea. Are you interested in this? And like, it was yes. And I was not expecting that at all.
Brilliant.
Because I think work like mine will always have trouble finding a home or a place because of its content. And I know it's not for everyone.
But
I said yes, and that was fantastic.
Yeah. But as you said, when you described the little girl that you saw reading the the Fred and Rose West book, the people that do recognize something, in themselves in it will love it. So it's like finding the people that have that same kind of connection.
Yeah.
It'll find those people for sure. Yeah, I was also interested in your style. Is it sort of ink in a sort of pointillist style? And I was wondering how you came to that style.
I just I had a go at making comics back in about 2008, 2009. And quite honestly, I'd never heard of like the other people who do this kind of style of work. I'd never heard of like Virgil Finlay or anyone. And I just wanted to do something that I hadn't seen before. Not that I was well read in comics at that time, but I thought it looked interesting and I thought it looked different. And after I'd finished doing these few pages of this first comic I did, I thought it looked okay and I was happy with it. And then, of course, you find out that it's not just you, other people can do it as well. And there's other people out there who can do it amazingly well. Wow. So I kind of stumbled into it, really. All I knew is that I wanted to do something that I felt was different.
Yeah, I was curious about whether you were reading a lot of comics because you sort of talk about finding comics as the main way that you were interested in expressing yourself going forward. Was that through reading comics that inspired you, or how did you come across the medium of comics?
Well, yeah, it's kind of like when you grow up and like comics in some form have always like been there. Like growing up, it was like Calvin and Hobbes and like toilet books.
Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
house, it was like the Bruins, which is a great Scottish strip book of those, Calvin and Hobbes, and that was like mixed in with like Scientific American and Charles Dickens books. So like comics had always just lived in our house with like regular books. They weren't like seen as any different and stuff. But yeah, teenager, you get into Dan Clowes and it kind of goes on from there. I never thought I was going to be a comic person. I was always going to be a painter. I was always going to be a portrait artist. But weirdly, just comics were always kind of there. And then when I was in my mid-20s, I don't know where I was. It wasn't a comic. It was a place with stalls, maybe like a local creative market in Leeds, and there was a fellow I recognised selling comics at a table, and I realised he lived just around the corner from us, and I just asked him, how do you make your own comics? And he just was like, he told me how, and it really was as simple as like, go to Colquitt or use a photocopier and get one of the long arm staples and stuff. And it's like, when you haven't tried something before and you suddenly realize, oh my God, that's so easy. Why didn't I just realize that? And that's kind of happened. It was like a revelation.
Yeah.
And so I had a go. Yeah. But whenever I wasn't painting, I always felt massively guilty that I wasn't painting.
So your portrait work was all paint. What sort of paint were you using?
Oh, I'd use acrylic paint, and it'd be very close up faces. So there was a woman, I mean, she's still going to paint, but I think she was part of that kind of mid-90s group of artists, young British artists, Jenny Saville. She did the very detailed, up-close portraits of women. Yeah, I was all about photorealism, getting skin texture right and things. I would, all the way through university and up until now, I guess, I've always, if I've seen pictures in papers or magazines or even, stories, I'd cut them out and keep them. And I amassed all this stuff over the years, and I would use that in my paintings. I would like make up faces, my own faces. Hairdressing magazines were great for that because the faces all came in the same size and they were easy to like mix up.
Yeah.
So I'd always like make my own people and paint them. And then I'd go on to kind of making like faces with other things, collagey type things, and painting it exactly as I could. But I just didn't have the personality to be a fine artist, because you needed to really push yourself and you needed to make connections and know people. And wow, I was absolutely not like that. So that never really worked out. And I was the first person in my family to go to university. So if I wasn't painting, I felt really guilty about it, because it was like I wasn't, you know.
Yeah, I really relate to that, because I was able to draw at quite a young age, and people were always pushing me in that direction of art because I seemed to be good at it. But I could not conceive of what I could do in the art world, because like you, I was just like, well, I can't be a fine artist. That's not me, and I don't think that's possible. So I stopped doing art for a good 5, 6, 7 years. And like I said, I studied literature instead, because I had absolutely no idea what I could do, and eventually found my way back to it much later on. But yeah, I went through that same thing of feeling a bit guilty, but also thinking, I don't see how I fit into that world at all. Don't think it's possible. And I'm glad I didn't try, because I don't think I would have enjoyed being in that world very much.
Yeah, what I saw of it wasn't great. And I'd try sculpture. I was big into textile sculpture and things, clothes design, but I'd always go back to the painting. I've had my hand in lots of creative things over the years.
Do you still paint at all now, or have you kind of stopped completely?
No. It's funny, after I was married before, and my husband passed away, and when I came to, like a few months after, it was like I felt no connection to any work I'd ever done. I felt I didn't, I looked at it and it was like I didn't know what it was, like it wasn't, I couldn't, it had like no connection to me at all. And I'd say after then it was kind of, because I lived in Wales then, and then I moved to England. I moved to Hebden Bridge. I didn't know anyone in Hebden Bridge. I literally just chose a place and moved there. And because where I was in Wales, there was like nothing really. So I went in a comic shop for the first time in years. I went to Leeds. I went to OK Comics in Leeds, and I bought Psychiatric Tales by Darrell Cunningham, and I bought Bad Gateway by Simon Hanselman, and I read them, and I thought I could do this. I could try and do this again. And it was kind of from that point I never went back to painting, and I tried to be a comic artist person.
Well, yeah, and you succeeded. I just bought Bad Gateway actually, so I've just been reading that. It's so good.
Yeah, it's excellent.
Well, I'm glad you found something, that you felt you could express yourself through, more than the portrait work that you had been doing.
I mean, I could look at the painting work and think, I am trying to tell a story. I'm trying to say something. Something's happening here, and I don't know what it is. And then I found that, I could say more, and I could say everything I wanted to, even though I wasn't fully conscious of it, on an A3 piece of paper, not like a 5-foot square canvas. And it also connects to people more.
Yeah. And are you currently working on any new projects?
I'm working on Fondant issue 4, which is my own single person anthology. That's been like a year and a half in the background. So I'm on page 18 of that now, and it'll be 24 pages. So I should be taking that with me to Thought Bubble, as well as the new book.
Excellent. Oh, well, hopefully I'll see you there. Yeah, and congratulations on the book. It's really fantastic.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for taking a chance and publishing something by me.
Yeah, it's a really interesting book, and thank you for taking the time to talk about it today.
That's okay. I hope I made sense at some point.